In the heart of London, where centuries of tradition meet millions of curious tourists every year, a single moment of confusion can spark an international incident. When security cameras captured a tourist's hands reaching towards something that had been untouchable for over 400 years, the footage went viral within hours. What seemed like a simple misunderstanding between a visitor and a royal guard would soon reveal deeper questions about respect, cultural awareness, and the invisible lines that separate observers from participants in living history. This is the true story of how one person's moment of curiosity nearly caused a diplomatic crisis and changed how royal ceremonies are protected forever. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Windsor Castle as thousands of tourists began their daily pilgrimage to witness one of Britain's most sacred traditions. Among them walked Marcus Chun, a 34-year-old software engineer from San Francisco, clutching his camera and guidebook with the enthusiasm of someone experiencing royal pageantry for the first time. He had planned this trip for months, saving every penny from his tech salary to afford 2 weeks exploring Europe, with London being his crown jewel destination. Marcus had arrived in London 3 days earlier, jet-lagged but determined to see everything on his carefully researched itinerary. The Tower of London, Buckingham Palace, Westminster Abbey. He had checked them all off his list with methodical precision. But today was special. Today he would witness the changing of the guard ceremony at Windsor Castle, something he had only seen in movies and documentaries. His excitement was palpable as he joined the growing crowd of spectators gathering behind the rope barriers. The atmosphere around Windsor Castle was electric with anticipation. Tour guides spoke in hushed, reverent tones about the history they were about to witness. Children pressed against their parents' legs, wide-eyed with wonder. Elderly couples pointed out architectural details they remembered from previous visits decades ago. Marcus found himself swept up in the collective excitement, his camera ready to capture every moment of what he understood to be a living piece of history. As the morning progressed, Marcus positioned himself strategically near the front of the crowd, determined to get the perfect photograph. He had read online that the guards' ceremonial uniforms were magnificent up close, with details that couldn't be appreciated from a distance. The famous bearskin hats, the pristine red tunics, and, most notably, the perfectly polished black boots that reflected the morning light like mirrors. His photography blog back home had a dedicated following, and he knew these images would be among his most popular posts. The ceremony began with the sound of approaching drums. The crowd fell silent as the first guard appeared, marching with mechanical precision that spoke of years of training and discipline. Marcus watched through his camera lens, mesmerized by the synchronization of movement. The way each guard's steps created a rhythm that seemed to echo through centuries of tradition. He had never seen anything quite like it in his life in Silicon Valley, where tradition meant technology that was perhaps 5 years old. Guard Captain James Morrison had been protecting the royal family for over 15 years. At 38, he was considered one of the most experienced and trusted members of the Queen's Guard. This particular morning held special significance as several foreign dignitaries were visiting, making every detail of the ceremony crucial to diplomatic relations. Morrison had briefed his men extensively about maintaining absolute professionalism and discipline, especially given the increased media attention the ceremony had been receiving lately. Morrison noticed the growing crowd as he took his position. His trained eye automatically scanned for potential security threats, noting exit routes, and identifying individuals who seemed out of place. His gaze briefly lingered on Marcus, not out of suspicion, but because the young man's enthusiasm was both endearing and slightly concerning. Morrison had seen enough tourists over the years to recognize the type who might get carried away in a moment and cross boundaries they didn't understand existed. The ceremony continued with flawless precision. Each movement was choreographed, not just for its visual impact, but for its symbolic meaning. The guards represented more than ceremonial tradition. They were active military personnel tasked with the actual protection of the royal family. Their rifles, while ceremonial in appearance, were fully functional weapons. Their training encompassed not just marching and standing at attention, but combat readiness, crowd control, and threat assessment. Marcus was completely absorbed in documenting every moment. His camera clicked continuously as he captured the guards' approach, their formation changes, and the magnificent details of their uniforms. Through his viewfinder, he noticed something that made him pause. One of the guards, a young man who couldn't have been more than 22, seemed to be having difficulty with his left boot. The highly polished leather appeared to have developed a scuff, and Marcus could see the guard's subtle attempts to adjust it without breaking formation. The young guard, Private Thomas Whitfield, was indeed experiencing his first major ceremony at Windsor Castle. He had been transferred from a less prestigious posting just weeks earlier, and was acutely aware that any mistake during this high-profile event could end his career with the Queen's Guard. The scuff on his boot had occurred during the final preparations that morning when another guard had accidentally stepped on it during formation practice. Whitfield had tried to polish it out, but under the bright morning sun, the imperfection was still visible. As the ceremony progressed toward its climax, Marcus found himself studying the guards more closely. His background in technology had trained him to notice details and problems that needed solving. He watched Private Whitfield's obvious discomfort and, in a moment that he would later struggle to explain even to himself, began to formulate a plan to help. In his mind, the guard was clearly distressed about his appearance, and Marcus thought he might have a solution. The crowd around Marcus was pressed tightly together, everyone straining to get the best view of the ceremony. Cell phones and cameras were held high, creating a forest of recording devices that captured every moment from multiple angles. The noise level, while respectful, created a constant low murmur of excitement and appreciation. In this environment, Marcus felt anonymous, just another face in the crowd documenting a historic moment. Captain Morrison completed his inspection of the guard formation and took his position to oversee the remainder of the ceremony. From his vantage point, he could see the entire courtyard, including the crowd of spectators. His years of experience had taught him to trust his instincts, and something about the energy in the crowd felt different today. There was an undercurrent of excitement that seemed more intense than usual, though he couldn't identify its source. The ceremony reached the point where the guards would hold their positions in complete stillness for several minutes. This was often the most challenging part for new guards like Private Whitfield, who had to maintain perfect composure despite any discomfort or distraction. The silence that fell over the courtyard was profound, broken only by the occasional click of camera shutters and the distant sounds of London traffic beyond the castle walls. Marcus noticed that the crowd had settled into a reverent quiet, everyone seemingly holding their breath as they witnessed this moment of living history. The guards stood like statues, their discipline and training evident in every line of their bodies. The morning light caught the details of their uniforms perfectly, creating the exact photographic opportunity Marcus had hoped for. But his attention kept returning to Private Whitfield and the obvious imperfection in his otherwise perfect appearance. In his pocket, Marcus carried a small bottle of emergency shoe polish that he had brought specifically for his dress shoes. He was planning to attend several upscale restaurants during his London visit and wanted to ensure his appearance was appropriate. The bottle was compact, designed for quick touch-ups, exactly what the young guard appeared to need. Marcus began to consider whether there might be a way to discreetly offer assistance. The idea seemed reasonable to Marcus in the context of his American background, where helpfulness and problem-solving were generally appreciated traits. He had no understanding of the centuries of protocol that governed every aspect of the Royal Guard's behavior, or the serious security implications of any unauthorized contact with the guards during an official ceremony. In his mind, he was simply one person wanting to help another person solve a minor, but embarrassing problem. Private Whitfield continued to stand at attention, but Marcus could see the subtle signs of stress in the young man's posture. Having been in high-pressure situations himself during important tech presentations, Marcus empathized with the guard's position. The parallel seemed clear to him. A professional person in a critical moment dealing with an equipment malfunction that could affect their performance and reputation. Captain Morrison began to notice some movement in the crowd that concerned him. While most spectators remained appropriately still and quiet, there seemed to be someone near the front who was shifting position more frequently than normal. His training emphasized the importance of monitoring crowd dynamics, as unusual behavior often preceded security incidents. He made a mental note to keep his attention divided between the ceremony and the crowd. The ceremony was approaching its conclusion when Marcus made his decision. The guards would soon begin their final formation changes, and this would likely be his only opportunity to help. He had observed that the rope barriers were positioned in a way that would allow him to quickly approach Private Whitfield, offer the shoe polish, and return to his position before disrupting the ceremony. In his mind, the entire interaction would take less than 30 seconds and would solve the guard's problem without anyone else even noticing. Marcus carefully moved closer to the rope barrier, positioning himself directly in line with where Private Whitfield stood. His heart was racing with the excitement of doing something genuinely helpful for someone in need. He had no idea that his movement had been noted by Captain Morrison or that security cameras were tracking his approach to the restricted area. The stage was set for a confrontation that would challenge everything both men thought they understood about respect, tradition, and cultural boundaries. The morning sun continued to shine down on Windsor Castle as Marcus reached into his pocket and prepared to cross a line that had been established centuries before he was born. In just a few moments, his gesture of helpfulness would create ripples that would reach far beyond the courtyard where he stood, affecting diplomatic relations, security protocols, and his own understanding of the complex relationship between tradition and modern life. The moment Marcus stepped over the rope barrier, everything changed. What had been a peaceful morning ceremony transformed into a high-tension security situation in the span of 3 seconds. The first person to notice was Mrs. Elizabeth Hartwell, a 67-year-old retired schoolteacher from Yorkshire who had been attending royal ceremonies for over 4 decades. She gasped audibly as she watched the young American tourist approach the immobile guard, her hand instinctively reaching for her husband's arm. Captain Morrison's training kicked in immediately. His peripheral vision caught the unauthorized movement, and his head snapped toward the disturbance even as he maintained his ceremonial position. Years of protecting the royal family had taught him that threats often came from unexpected sources, and tourists who broke protocol were never to be taken lightly. His right hand moved imperceptibly toward his radio, ready to call for backup if the situation escalated. Marcus was completely unaware of the alarm he had triggered. In his focused determination to help Private Whitfield, he had tunnel vision that blocked out everything except his intended target. The small bottle of shoe polish felt warm in his hand as he approached the young guard, rehearsing in his mind the quick, efficient way he would offer assistance. He imagined Private Whitfield's grateful relief when the scuff on his boot disappeared, allowing him to complete the ceremony with dignity intact. Private Whitfield himself was the last to realize what was happening. His training required him to maintain his forward gaze regardless of distractions, but the murmur from the crowd and subtle shift in energy around him indicated something unusual was occurring. When Marcus appeared in his peripheral vision, Whitfield's blood pressure spiked dramatically. Every instinct screamed at him to react, but his training demanded absolute stillness during the ceremony. The crowd's reaction created a domino effect of awareness. Those who had noticed Marcus's movement began whispering to their companions, pointing discreetly in his direction. Cell phone cameras that had been focused on the guards suddenly swiveled to capture this unexpected drama. Within moments, dozens of devices were recording what everyone sensed was about to become a significant incident. Marcus reached Private Whitfield and, with what he considered appropriate discretion, whispered, "Excuse me, I noticed your boot has a scuff. I have some polish that might help." He held up the small bottle, genuinely believing he was offering a helpful solution to an obvious problem. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, as was his complete lack of understanding about the magnitude of his breach of protocol. Private Whitfield's world exploded in a crisis. Never in his military training had he encountered a scenario where a tourist approached him during an official ceremony with an offer to polish his boots. The absurdity of the situation was matched only by its seriousness. Any response he made could be seen as breaking his ceremonial duties, but ignoring a potential security threat was equally problematic. Sweat began to form under his ceremonial hat despite the cool morning air. Captain Morrison was already in motion. His years of experience told him that this tourist, while clearly well-intentioned, had created a security breach that required immediate response. The presence of foreign dignitaries made the situation even more delicate. Any perception that the Royal Guard security was inadequate could have diplomatic implications far beyond this single incident. He began moving toward Marcus with purposeful but controlled steps. The other guards in formation faced their own dilemma. They had seen their captain begin to move and sensed the disturbance, but their training demanded they maintain position unless explicitly ordered otherwise. The tension among the guards was palpable as they struggled to balance their ceremonial duties with their security responsibilities. Each guard was acutely aware that their response to this unprecedented situation would be scrutinized and evaluated. Mrs. Hartwell found herself becoming an inadvertent narrator for the unfolding drama. "He's trying to polish the guard's boot," she whispered urgently to her husband, Harold. "I've never seen anything like this in 40 years of watching ceremonies." Harold, a former military man himself, understood immediately the severity of what they were witnessing. "That young man has no idea what he's done," he murmured back, shaking his head in disbelief. The security team positioned around the ceremony perimeter had been alerted by Captain Morrison's movement and were already adjusting their positions. These were professionals trained to handle everything from terrorist threats to confused tourists. But this situation fell into an unusual category. The tourist appeared completely harmless and genuinely helpful, yet his actions constituted a clear security breach during an official royal ceremony. Marcus finally began to sense that something was wrong. The change in atmosphere around him was becoming impossible to ignore, and the approaching figure of Captain Morrison registered in his consciousness as potentially problematic. However, his interpretation of the situation was still filtered through his cultural background and good intentions. He assumed he might be in trouble for a minor protocol violation, not that he had potentially triggered a security emergency. When Captain Morrison reached Marcus, the confrontation was both quieter and more intense than the crowd expected. Morrison's voice was controlled but firm as he said, "Sir, you need to step away from the guard immediately and return to the designated viewing area." His posture and tone left no room for argument, though his words remained professionally courteous. The captain's experience had taught him that de-escalation was always preferable to confrontation, especially with international tourists. Marcus looked genuinely confused as he responded, "I'm sorry, I was just trying to help. His boot has a scuff, and I thought." He held up the bottle of shoe polish again, as if the logic of his actions would become clear once Captain Morrison understood his intentions. The cultural disconnect was profound. Marcus saw helpfulness where Morrison saw a security breach, and neither man initially understood the other's perspective. The tension in the crowd reached a breaking point as everyone waited to see how this unprecedented situation would resolve. Children sensed their parents' anxiety and began asking questions in stage whispers. Tour guides found themselves in uncharted territory, with no standard explanation for what their groups were witnessing. The ceremony that was supposed to showcase British tradition and discipline had become a cross-cultural drama playing out in real time. Private Whitfield remained frozen in his ceremonial position, though every muscle in his body was tense with stress. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on him. His concern about the scuff on his boot had indirectly caused a much larger problem. He could hear the conversation between Marcus and Captain Morrison, but couldn't react without abandoning his post. The minutes felt like hours as he waited for resolution. Captain Morrison realized he was dealing with a genuine cultural misunderstanding rather than a security threat. Marcus's confusion and willingness to comply, combined with his obvious good intentions, made it clear that education rather than punishment was the appropriate response. However, the public nature of the incident meant that any resolution needed to address both the immediate situation and the larger message about respecting royal protocols. The crowd began to understand that they were witnessing something unprecedented in the history of royal ceremonies. Cell phone videos of the incident were already being uploaded to social media, with captions ranging from amused to outraged. The story was beginning to take on a life of its own, even as the principals involved were still working through the immediate confrontation. Marcus finally began to comprehend the seriousness of his actions as he looked around and saw hundreds of people watching the interaction. The weight of their attention, combined with Captain Morrison's firm but professional demeanor, made it clear that he had crossed a line he hadn't known existed. His face flushed with embarrassment as the reality of his mistake began to sink in. The resolution of the immediate confrontation would need to balance multiple competing interests, maintaining the dignity of the ceremony, respecting the tourists' good intentions, upholding security protocols, and managing the international attention the incident was already generating. Captain Morrison found himself in the position of not just protecting the Royal Guard, but protecting the reputation of British hospitality and cultural understanding. As Marcus slowly backed away from Private Whitfield, still clutching the bottle of shoe polish, both men knew that this moment would be remembered and discussed for years to come. What had started as a simple gesture of helpfulness had become a complex lesson in cultural awareness, security protocols, and the invisible boundaries that surround living traditions. The ceremony would continue, but its meaning had been forever changed by this unexpected human moment. The crowd remained silent, sensing that they had witnessed something significant, but not yet understanding what it meant for the future of such ceremonies. The morning sun continued to shine down on Windsor Castle, but the shadows had shifted, and everyone present knew that something important had just occurred, even if they couldn't yet articulate what it was. Within hours of the incident, the video footage had gone viral across every major social media platform. The hashtag BootPolishGate began trending worldwide, with millions of views and thousands of comments pouring in from every corner of the globe. What made the story particularly compelling was the clear documentation of Marcus's genuine confusion and good intentions, captured from multiple angles by the dozens of tourists who had been recording the ceremony. Sarah Chun, Marcus's younger sister and a social media manager in Los Angeles, was among the first to see the footage when a friend tagged her in a Twitter post. Her initial disbelief quickly turned to a mixture of pride and concern as she watched her brother's attempted act of kindness play out on the international stage. She immediately began coordinating with the family's response, knowing that Marcus would need support as this story spread beyond anything they could have imagined. The British tabloid press seized on the story with characteristic enthusiasm. The Daily Mirror led with Yank's royal protocol, while the Sun opted for Boot Eiffel blunder at the palace. However, the coverage wasn't universally negative. Many articles focused on Marcus's obvious good intentions and questioned whether the rigid protocol surrounding royal ceremonies had become outdated in an era of global tourism and cultural exchange. BBC News took a more measured approach, interviewing royal protocol experts and military historians about the incident. Dr. Margaret Thornton, a historian specializing in royal traditions at Oxford University, provided context that many initial reports had missed. "What we're seeing here isn't disrespect," she explained during a live interview. "This appears to be a genuine cultural misunderstanding between an American tourist's impulse to be helpful and centuries-old British military protocol that most visitors simply aren't aware of." The reaction from international audiences revealed fascinating cultural divides. American commentators largely sided with Marcus, viewing his actions as neighborly and helpful. Many compared the situation to American values of democracy and accessibility, questioning why ceremonial guards should be untouchable in a modern society. European responses were more mixed, with many understanding the importance of maintaining historical traditions while sympathizing with Marcus's obvious good intentions. Captain Morrison found himself at the center of media attention he had never sought. His handling of the situation was being analyzed by security experts, cultural commentators, and social media users alike. The Royal Guard's media liaison office was flooded with interview requests, though Morrison himself remained focused on his duties while allowing official spokespersons to handle the press attention. His professional response to Marcus was being praised as an example of how to handle cultural misunderstandings with dignity. Private Whitfield was experiencing his own form of viral fame. Fellow guards nicknamed him Scuff Boot, though without malice, and the incident had actually enhanced his reputation within the regiment. His ability to maintain composure during such an unusual situation was seen as evidence of excellent training and personal discipline. The scuff on his boot, ironically, had been completely forgotten in the aftermath of the much larger drama it had inadvertently caused. Marcus himself was struggling with the sudden international attention. His hotel room phone rang constantly with interview requests from media outlets around the world. His email inbox was flooded with messages ranging from support and sympathy to criticism and advice. The shy software engineer who had simply wanted to help someone was now the face of a global conversation about cultural sensitivity, tourism etiquette, and the relevance of traditional ceremonies in modern times. The tourist industry in London was watching the situation closely, concerned about potential impacts on visitor numbers and international perception. However, initial indicators suggested the opposite effect might be occurring. Tourism boards reported increased inquiries about visiting royal sites, with many tourists expressing interest in seeing the locations where the incident had occurred. The story seemed to be humanizing the typically formal and distant world of royal ceremonies. Academic institutions seized on the incident as a perfect case study for courses on cross-cultural communication, international relations, and tourism management. Professor James Whitmore at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service assigned his students to analyze the incident from multiple cultural perspectives, leading to fascinating discussions about assumptions, intentions, and the importance of understanding local customs when traveling. The royal family's official response, when it finally came through traditional channels, was measured and diplomatic. A statement from Buckingham Palace acknowledged the tourists' good intentions while reaffirming the importance of maintaining proper protocols during official ceremonies. The statement also announced that consideration was being given to enhanced pre-ceremony briefings for tourists about appropriate behavior during royal events. International diplomatic circles were also taking note of the incident, though for different reasons. The respectful way the situation had been handled was being cited as an example of successful conflict de-escalation and cultural bridge building. Several embassies used the incident in their cultural orientation materials for staff posted to foreign countries, emphasizing the importance of understanding local customs and protocols. Marcus's employer, a progressive tech company in Silicon Valley, initially supported him publicly, viewing his actions as consistent with the company's values of helpfulness and problem-solving. However, as the story continued to generate controversy, the company's communications team began crafting more neutral statements that supported Marcus personally while avoiding taking sides in the cultural debate his actions had sparked. The incident also triggered broader discussions about accessibility and inclusivity in royal ceremonies. Disability rights advocates pointed out that the untouchable nature of the guards could be problematic for visitors with certain conditions who might need assistance or accidentally make contact. These conversations led to renewed examination of how traditional ceremonies could be maintained while accommodating diverse modern audiences. Religious and cultural commentators from around the world weighed in with their perspectives on the balance between preserving tradition and embracing modern values of helpfulness and human connection. Rabbi David Goldman from New York observed, "This young man acted from the heart, seeing someone in distress and wanting to help." That impulse should be celebrated, even as we learn about different cultural contexts. Imam Hassan al-Rashid from London added, "Understanding and respecting different traditions is part of being a responsible global citizen, but so is approaching others with kindness and good intentions." The legal implications of the incident were minimal, but they sparked interesting discussions about tourism law and cultural protection statutes. Legal scholars debated whether clearer signage and pre-ceremony briefings might have prevented the misunderstanding, and whether tourists had a responsibility to research local customs before attending cultural events. Marcus began receiving offers for book deals, speaking engagements, and even television appearances. While initially overwhelmed by the attention, he gradually began to see an opportunity to contribute something positive to the global conversation his actions had started. He started working with cultural exchange organizations to develop materials that could help other travelers navigate similar situations with greater awareness. The story took on new dimensions when it was revealed that Marcus had actually spent considerable time researching British customs before his trip, but that none of his sources had explicitly mentioned the protocols surrounding interaction with guards during ceremonies. This discovery led to improvements in travel guides and tourism websites, with many adding specific sections about royal ceremony etiquette. Support groups for Marcus emerged online, with travelers sharing their own stories of cultural misunderstandings and offering advice for navigating similar situations. The hashtag culturally confused became a space for people to share experiences and learn from each other about the complexities of international travel and cultural exchange. The incident also had unexpected positive effects on British-American relations at a grassroots level. Many Britons expressed admiration for Marcus's willingness to help a stranger, even as they educated him about proper protocols. Americans, in turn, gained new appreciation for the historical significance and military precision of royal ceremonies. The mutual respect and learning that emerged from the incident became a model for how cultural misunderstandings could lead to greater understanding rather than division. 6 months after the incident, Marcus found himself back in London, but this time under very different circumstances. The Royal Guard had extended an official invitation for him to return and participate in a new cultural orientation program they had developed partly in response to his experience. The program aimed to help international tourists better understand British royal traditions while maintaining the dignity and security of ceremonial events. The transformation in Marcus was evident to everyone who met him. The shy software engineer who had acted on impulse had become a thoughtful advocate for cross-cultural understanding. His experience had taught him valuable lessons about the importance of cultural research and the unintended consequences of well-meaning actions. However, he had also gained confidence in speaking about the value of human kindness and the need for patience when cultural misunderstandings occur. Captain Morrison, now promoted to Major Morrison, had become something of a celebrity within royal protection circles for his handling of the original incident. His measured response and ability to de-escalate the situation while maintaining protocol had earned him recognition from senior military officials and royal household staff. He had also become a key figure in developing new training programs that help guards handle similar situations with cultural sensitivity while maintaining security standards. The new orientation program at Windsor Castle was groundbreaking in its approach. Rather than simply listing prohibited behaviors, it provided historical context for royal protocols and explained the reasoning behind various traditions. Visitors learned about the military heritage of the guards, the security considerations that shaped ceremonies, and the cultural significance of maintaining these traditions in modern times. Marcus had been consulted extensively during the program's development. Private Whitfield, now Corporal Whitfield, had become something of a poster child for grace under pressure within the Royal Guard. His ability to maintain composure during the boot polish incident had actually accelerated his career progression. He often shared his experience with new recruits, emphasizing the importance of staying calm and following protocol even in unprecedented situations. The famous scuff boot had been retired, and was now part of a display about the incident. The global conversation sparked by the incident had produced tangible changes in tourism practices worldwide. Travel guidebooks now included more detailed sections on cultural etiquette and protocol expectations. Tourism boards had developed better pre-visit orientation materials, and many popular tourist destinations had implemented brief cultural briefings for visitors attending traditional ceremonies or events. Academic institutions around the world had embraced the incident as a perfect case study for multiple disciplines. It appeared in textbooks on international relations, cultural anthropology, tourism management, and conflict resolution. The respectful way all parties had handled the aftermath was frequently cited as an example of how to transform misunderstandings into opportunities for learning and connection. Marcus's story had also influenced corporate training programs, particularly for companies with international operations. His experience demonstrated the importance of cultural preparation for employees traveling abroad and the value of approaching mistakes with humility and willingness to learn. Several Fortune 500 companies had incorporated elements of his story into their cultural sensitivity training programs. The media attention had eventually subsided, but the positive impacts continued to ripple outward. Marcus had written a thoughtful blog post about his experience that became required reading in many cultural studies courses. His emphasis on the importance of good intentions, while acknowledging the need for cultural awareness, resonated with readers around the world who had faced similar challenges during international travel. The Royal Guard had also benefited from the increased attention, though they had been careful to maintain their traditional dignity throughout the process. Public understanding of their role had increased significantly, with many people gaining new appreciation for the training, discipline, and dedication required to serve as a Royal Guard. Tourism to royal sites had actually increased, with visitors showing greater respect and understanding for the protocol surrounding ceremonies. The relationship between Marcus and the guards had evolved into an unexpected friendship. During his return visit, he was able to meet privately with both Major Morrison and Corporal Whitfield, sharing perspectives on how the incident had affected all their lives. The conversation was warm and genuine, with all three men expressing respect for how the others had handled the situation and its aftermath. The shoe polish that had started everything had been donated to a British military museum, where it was displayed alongside the story of the incident. The small bottle had become a symbol of good intentions misaligned with cultural understanding, and visitors often remarked on how such a simple object had sparked such a meaningful global conversation about respect, tradition, and human connection. Marcus's personal growth throughout the experience had been remarkable. He had learned to research cultural expectations more thoroughly before traveling, but he had also maintained his fundamental belief in the importance of helping others when possible. His approach had become more informed and respectful, but no less compassionate. He often spoke about the incident as one of the most educational experiences of his life. The incident had also influenced policy discussions about tourism management at heritage sites worldwide. The balance between accessibility and preservation, between welcoming visitors and maintaining traditional protocols, had become a central theme in tourism planning conferences. Marcus's experience provided a real-world example of how these competing interests could be managed with respect and creativity. International relations scholars pointed to the incident as an example of soft diplomacy at work. The respectful way both American and British cultures had engaged with the misunderstanding had strengthened rather than strained relationships between the two countries. The incident demonstrated that cultural differences, when approached with good faith and mutual respect, could become opportunities for deeper understanding rather than sources of conflict. The legacy of the boot polish incident extended far beyond its original participants. It had become a teaching tool, a conversation starter, and a reminder of the importance of approaching cultural differences with both respect and patience. The story continued to be shared in contexts ranging from university classrooms to diplomatic training sessions, illustrating the power of human stories to transcend cultural boundaries and create connections across different ways of life. As Marcus prepared to return home from his second London visit, he reflected on how a simple gesture of helpfulness had changed his understanding of the world and his place in it. The experience had taught him that good intentions, while valuable, were most effective when combined with cultural knowledge and respect for local traditions. However, it had also reinforced his belief that human kindness and the desire to help others were universal values worth preserving and celebrating, even when their expression needed to be adapted to different cultural contexts. 2 years later, the impact of the Windsor Castle incident had grown far beyond what anyone could have predicted. Marcus Chun had become an unlikely ambassador for thoughtful international travel, speaking at cultural exchange events and contributing to guidebooks that emphasized respectful tourism. His transformation from confused tourist to cultural bridge builder represented a powerful example of how personal growth could emerge from embarrassing mistakes when approached with humility and openness to learning. The Royal Guard had institutionalized many of the lessons learned from the incident. New recruits now received specific training on handling tourist interactions with cultural sensitivity while maintaining security protocols. The program that had been developed in consultation with Marcus had become a model for other heritage sites worldwide, demonstrating how traditional institutions could adapt to modern global tourism without compromising their essential character or significance. Major Morrison had been selected to lead a new international exchange program that brought military ceremonial units from different countries together to share best practices for managing tourist interactions during traditional ceremonies. His experience with the boot polish incident had made him a sought-after expert on balancing accessibility with protocol, and his insights were helping shape policies at ceremonial sites from the Vatican to the Imperial Palace in Tokyo. The academic community had embraced the incident as a landmark case study that appeared in curricula across multiple disciplines. Dr. Margaret Thornton from Oxford had published a comprehensive analysis of the incident and its aftermath that became required reading in cultural studies programs worldwide. Her work examined how a single moment of cultural misunderstanding had generated positive changes in tourism practices, diplomatic training, and cross-cultural education. Corporate America had also taken notice of the lessons from Marcus's experience. His employer had promoted him to lead their international expansion team, recognizing that his hard-won understanding of cultural nuances made him valuable for navigating complex global business relationships. Other companies had reached out to Marcus for consultation on preparing employees for international assignments, particularly in situations where cultural protocols were especially important. The story had inspired a documentary film that premiered at the Sundance Film Festival, focusing on how small moments of human connection could bridge cultural divides. The film followed Marcus, Major Morrison, and Corporal Whitfield as they reflected on their shared experience and its lasting impact on their lives and careers. The documentary won several awards and was eventually acquired by a streaming service, reaching millions of viewers worldwide. Tourism patterns at Windsor Castle and other royal sites had shifted significantly in response to the improved cultural orientation programs developed after the incident. Visitors reported feeling more confident and respectful during their experiences, and there had been a notable decrease in protocol violations and cultural misunderstandings. The enhanced preparation had actually improved the quality of the tourist experience while reducing stress for both visitors and staff. The incident had also influenced international diplomatic protocol training. Embassy staff worldwide now used Marcus's story as an example of how good intentions without cultural knowledge could create unintended complications, while also demonstrating how respectful handling of such situations could strengthen rather than damage international relationships. The case had become a standard component of cultural attaché training programs. Marcus had used his unexpected platform to advocate for improved cultural education in schools, arguing that global citizenship required understanding of different traditions and customs. He had partnered with educational organizations to develop curriculum materials that helped students appreciate the complexity and beauty of different cultural practices while understanding the importance of approaching them with respect and humility. The British tourism industry had seen significant benefits from the enhanced reputation for handling cultural misunderstandings with grace and education rather than confrontation. The story had become part of Britain's soft power narrative, demonstrating values of patience, understanding, and commitment to helping visitors appreciate local traditions. Tourism numbers had actually increased as potential visitors felt more confident about navigating cultural expectations. Corporal Whitfield had been selected for advanced leadership training within the Royal Guard, partly based on his exemplary handling of the pressure during the boot polish incident. He had become a mentor for new guards, teaching them not just protocol and procedure, but the importance of maintaining dignity and composure even in unprecedented situations. His experience had made him particularly effective at preparing guards for the realities of serving in highly visible, tourist-heavy environments. The small bottle of shoe polish that had started everything had become a surprisingly popular exhibit at the British Military Museum. Visitors often photographed themselves with it, and the display had become a focal point for discussions about cultural understanding and the unintended consequences of helpfulness. The museum reported that the exhibit generated more thoughtful visitor engagement than many of their more traditional military displays. International relations experts had written extensively about the incident as an example of how individual actions could influence diplomatic relationships. The respectful response from British institutions and the gracious acceptance of cultural education by Marcus had been cited as a model for how cultural differences could be navigated in an increasingly connected world. The incident had become a case study in successful soft diplomacy. The story had also influenced social media policies and practices around viral content involving cultural misunderstandings. The largely positive and educational response to Marcus's experience had demonstrated the potential for online communities to approach such incidents with nuance and empathy rather than simple mockery or outrage. Several platforms had modified their community guidelines to encourage more thoughtful engagement with cross-cultural content. Marcus's personal relationships had been profoundly affected by his experience. His family had gained new appreciation for his thoughtful approach to learning from mistakes, and his friends often sought his advice when planning international travel. His dating life had actually improved as well, as potential partners were attracted to his demonstrated ability to grow from difficult experiences and his genuine interest in understanding different perspectives. The royal family had privately expressed appreciation for how the incident had been handled by all parties involved. The respectful resolution had reinforced their public image as accessible yet dignified, and the educational programs that emerged from the experience aligned with their long-standing commitment to cultural exchange and international understanding. Several members of the family had privately met with Marcus during his return visits to thank him for his gracious response to the situation. The incident had spawned numerous copycat attempts by attention-seeking tourists, but these were generally handled quickly and quietly by security staff who had been trained using lessons learned from the original incident. The authentic nature of Marcus's mistake and his sincere response to education made it clear when others were simply seeking publicity rather than genuinely trying to help. Research institutions had used the incident as a starting point for broader studies on tourist behavior, cultural adaptation, and the psychology of helpful intentions in cross-cultural contexts. The findings had influenced design of tourist spaces, development of cultural orientation programs, and training for staff at heritage sites worldwide. Marcus had participated in several of these studies, contributing insights about his thought processes and emotional journey throughout the experience. As Marcus reflected on the ongoing impact of his split-second decision to offer shoe polish to a royal guard, he marveled at how a single moment of cultural confusion had generated so many positive changes. His experience had demonstrated that mistakes, when handled with humility and genuine willingness to learn, could become catalysts for understanding and connection rather than division and embarrassment. The legacy of the boot polish incident continued to grow, touching lives and improving cultural understanding in ways that none of the original participants could have imagined possible. The story had become more than just an amusing anecdote about a tourist mistake. It had evolved into a powerful reminder that human kindness and cultural respect could coexist when people approach differences with open hearts and minds. Marcus's journey from confused tourist to cultural ambassador demonstrated that anyone could contribute to building bridges between different ways of life, starting with the simple willingness to learn from their experiences and share those lessons with others.